Welcome to the Consulting Success Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Zapersky. In this podcast, we'll dive deep into the world of elite consultants, where you'll learn the strategies, tactics, and mindset to grow a highly profitable and successful consulting business. Hey, it's Michael Zapersky, and today I'm very excited to have John Warrillow joining us. John, welcome.
Hey, thanks, Michael. Good to be here.
So, John, for those who don't know you, just take a moment and explain what you do.
I run a company called the Value Builder System, where we help entrepreneurs improve the value of their company. And our delivery model is actually to license that platform to consultants. We've got 900 consultants all around the world, most in North America, some in the UK, some in Australia. And they help companies improve their value. So that's kind of what we do.
Okay, absolutely love it. You know, one of the reasons why I was excited to have you on the show here is because I know that back in the early days, so I think in the 90s, you started a consulting business, an advisory type of business, and later went on to sell that business after some transitions and shifts. But where I'd like to begin is you, I believe, started that consulting business about 3 years or so after leaving university. Is that correct?
About that, yeah, that's right.
Okay. And how did you get into consulting?
You know, it's kind of circuitous. I was producing a radio show about entrepreneurs, and I interviewed a different entrepreneur every day. Every day of the week over a 3-year period. And one of the sponsors was a big Canadian bank called RBC. And they started asking for advice. They said, you know, we sponsor this radio show you produce. Seems like you're talking to all these entrepreneurs. How do they think? Because as a big bank, we're having trouble connecting with them. They think we're just this huge monolith and we can't get any traction in our marketing. We get terrible response rates in our direct mail campaigns. So come in, sit in a boardroom with us, and give us some advice on how these guys think. And I'm like, yeah, sure, fine, no problem. I mean, you're just paying us a truckload of money to sponsor this show. So yeah, I'd be happy to do that. And they asked me back and back. And eventually, after kind of the third or fourth time, I was like, okay, maybe I should start charging you guys for advice. And that's kind of how it started.
So how did you then, so that was, I guess, essentially your first client was RBC or Royal Bank for those who may not know about RBC. But, you know, how did you then move forward from that? How did what did your next client look like? Was it continuing to provide advice for larger organizations around small business? Just kind of walk us through what your business looked like and then how you went actually about getting those next clients.
Well, that's exactly right. So we picked a very, very hyper niche, which was the only, I didn't set up to be a consultant. I knew nothing about consulting. I'd gone to school for sociology. I was completely unqualified to be a consultant. I still am today, by the way. What we chose to do, or what I chose to do at the time, because it was just me, was be very, very hyper niche, which was basically helping large enterprise organizations like RBC understand and market to the SMB segment, or small, medium business owners. And so basically I said, so Royal Bank was a client, RBC Royal Bank was a client, and I went to IBM. At the time, they had a big strategy for reaching our SMB, and I said, look, Royal Bank is a client. You know, would you let me come in and tell you about our little niche? I was the only guy in town helping big companies understand small companies. So it's relatively easy to get a meeting, even though it was IBM. And once we had IBM as a customer, we got Dell as a customer. Once we got Dell, we got Apple. Once we got Apple, we got Verizon. And it basically it snowballed. One of the key things I learned from that is the critical importance of being hyper niche, right? Because as soon as we had a couple clients, we got people that didn't want to reach SMB ask for advice, and it took enormous discipline, especially back in those early days where, you know, cash flow is a problem. You're trying to kind of scrape together a business. It took a lot of discipline to turn away stuff that didn't fit within that niche of helping very large companies reach very small companies. But we stuck to it, and ultimately that company was acquired, by a public business. Now you would know the company is Gartner Group. They're a $2 billion Fortune 500.
Did you have any anxiety, fear, like just going on? I mean, a lot of consultants, when they think about reaching out to an enterprise size organizations or just large organizations in general, there's a lot of fear in their minds or just the feeling of like, I'm venturing to this unknown place, this abyss, and they tend to hesitate around that. It sounds like you just kind of reached out to these people and, made things happen. So take us back to that time. I mean, what was going through your mind when you were deciding to reach out to these large organizations?
Maybe I was just ignorant. Ignorance is bliss. I was 23, 24, probably too stupid and too young to realize that they would likely say no, which is probably a part of it. I was also part of an organization, I should give credit where credit is due, called YEA. I don't know that it still exists. Someone might correct me if there is. I think it stands for Young Entrepreneurs Association. It was sort of a loosely affiliated with EO, Entrepreneurs Organization,
Right.
Today. But YEA was for smaller companies, startup companies. And I was fortunate because a couple of the sponsors of YEA were Bank and IBM. And so I got a chance to meet some of the executives from these companies just because I was a member of this organization. So I don't want to take too much credit. I was fortunate to have had the opportunity to meet some people that were looking to support young, ambitious entrepreneurs. So I probably got lucky by being part of that organization as well.
Right. That gave you, it sounds like, the confidence then to reach out to these people. But how did you actually reach out to them? Were you picking up the phone, just giving them a call? Were you sending an email? What is the actual process that you used to prospect and land these clients?
Yeah, I mean, that back now to the mid 1990s. So this is kind of early email days, right? So an email at the time was really all you needed. People weren't getting thousands of emails; they might get 5. So this goes back to that. I came from a background of sales. I was in radio sales before I got into production of radio. So I wasn't too nervous about picking up the phone. So it would have been a combination of email and phone. I can tell you these days, we use LinkedIn a lot. If we were to cold prospect a large enterprise organization, it would most likely be LinkedIn and a very highly tailored LinkedIn message acknowledging the people that we know in common. That would be the way we do it today. But back in those days, it would have been a combination of email and phone.
Nice. Okay. So you built up that business, you're picking up these larger enterprise clients, and then something happened from what I know of you and what I've kind of seen, and that's that you shifted your model. You went from kind of advising, consulting these clients to more of a subscription-based business. Is that correct?
You're right. We had seen, and this was the fundamental change that made us from a traditional consultancy into a sellable company. So traditional consultancies, as you can imagine, are difficult to sell because David Ogilvy said that, the assets go up and down the elevator at the end of the night, and there really is no kind of lasting value. And so I got to thinking that I wanted to build something that had some value that I might want to exit at some point. And so I looked around at different models. At the time, there were companies like IDC, Yankee Group, Gartner Group. There were these big companies that did syndicated market research. Instead of doing a one-off project or one-off consulting project, they would say, okay, looks like a dozen or so of our clients have the same question, same fundamental consulting need. And so why don't we go out and do some research? Instead of doing it on a one-off basis, we would share the results across all of our subscribers, all of our customers. And so that's the model we changed to. And so that was a fundamental shift. And I believe in addition to focusing on a specific niche, that was the second most important thing we did, which was shift from kind of one-off project-based consulting to syndicated subscription-based research, which was a fundamental shift for us.
How hard of a shift was that to make?
We screwed it up the first time.
Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so we made a fundamental mistake at the beginning, and now it's something that we talk a lot about, is that we did not give our customers an ultimatum. So we went into customers like Royal Bank and IBM and Apple and GE and all these very large enterprise organizations. And we kind of put our tail between our legs and say, oh, we've got a new idea for a company. We're thinking of offering subscription services. But of course, you can continue to use us as a traditional consulting firm. But if you'd like, we can sell you this little subscription over here. And companies like IBM and Royal Bank, if given the choice, they will always choose a custom solution, right? They are always going to choose, that's nice that you have this little syndicated offering, but we're Royal Bank. We're going to have you do it exactly the way we want to. And so we went in and we got a half dozen subscribers, but we were running both companies in unison in parallel, a custom consulting company and a syndicated market research company. And doing that was a huge mistake because, as you can imagine, it takes two different staffing models. One, in the custom consulting, you need very high-end consultants. You need really quite expensive people, lower gearing ratio. Whereas a syndicated research, you can get away with cheaper people, spreading the costs over multiple, totally different business models. Our limited cash resources, we were privately funded. I funded the company, so our limited cash resources were being spread across two business models. And eventually, the biggest mistake I made was looking at traditional key performance metrics of traditional consulting businesses, because a traditional consultancy, you're not building value. You're just focused on driving and taking money out of the company at the end of the year.
Mm-hmm.
Compensation per partner, right? And so I was using the profit and loss statement as my key performance indicator, how I was doing as a company. And what I didn't realize that subscription recurring revenue model companies use a completely different operating set of metrics. They look at something called LTV to CAC ratio as a way to measure the success of the company. And they virtually ignore the profit and loss statement, certainly for the first 3 or 4 years of a subscription offering. And so here I was using a traditional business profit and loss statement as a way to measure a subscription company. Fundamental mistake. And so about maybe 6 months into offering subscriptions, we actually turned off subscriptions. We retreated. We went back to custom consulting. And for a few weeks, a few months, I should say, it felt good, right? Because our profitability came back. One of the things you have to know about syndicated research is that you spread or amortize the revenue over the life of the subscription. So we would sell a subscription for $40,000, our research, but we took that in 12 equal installments of like $3,500.
Right.
And so it had the artificial response of actually decreasing our profitability dramatically because we were spreading that revenue out. And so that became a problem. Our profitability was hampered, and I turned off the subscription offering thinking, oh, well, that was a mistake. Not realizing we had taken a huge step backwards in building a more valuable company because we retreated against a more scalable offering. About 2 years later, we realized the error of our ways, relaunched the subscription offering. But the fundamental difference the second time around is we gave customers an ultimatum. So we went to Royal Bank and IBM and others and said, look, we've changed our business model. We believe this better serves you in the long run, and we're no longer going to do business with you in the old way. So it's an ultimatum. You either change and move to the subscription offering, or we can't do business anymore. And there's a funny thing that happens when you do that to large enterprise organizations. Again, companies like Apple and JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo, all of whom are customers of ours, they don't take kindly to being told how to do business with you. So all of a sudden they get on the edge of their seat and they say, you cocky little son of a fill in the blank. How dare you come in here to JP Morgan Chase in New York City and tell us how we're going to buy from you? You tell me how good this subscription is. I want to know how, why is this subscription so good? What do I get out of it? How many seats do I get? How many of my customers can come? And all of a sudden they're probing you with penetrating questions. And if you can respond to them favorably, you've got their attention. But as long as you sort of sit on the fence and say, oh, you can still use a subscription offer, or you can still use this as a consultancy, or you can have, they're going to say, thanks, got the information on the subscription, but let's focus now on my custom solution because I'm JP Morgan Chase. So forcing them to an ultimatum is strong cheese. But if you can get them to pay attention, then it will get them to pay attention one way or the other.
So, John, how do you make that more compelling? Because even for those that aren't looking to, let's say, offer subscription or syndicated research, they may be looking to productize their service offerings. And so I think this could apply to them just the same. How do you make that then more compelling to whether it's a large client or a mid-sized client or a small client? If they've been on custom services, they've been treated and they've been feeling like everything that you're doing is specifically for them. And now you're saying, listen, we're going to offer you this and we're offering the same thing to other people. How do you get them to say yes to that?
I mean, that is the ultimate challenge. It is to try to find something that you offer which is really, truly unique to what you do. And so it's unlikely to be all of your services. It's unlikely to be even a broad set of your services. It's very likely that if you canvass your customers, there is really one or two things that you do better than anybody else. So I think the raw material is going to be customer insight. So either doing it yourself or commissioning a third-party research company to go out and talk to your customers and say, ask questions like, what does this company do better than anybody else? What do you truly value coming from this company? What does this company offer today that's a commodity that you could get from 5 other consultancies? But what is it that you truly value coming from this company? I'll give you an example. I was asked to sort of advise a new startup advertising agency. I met with the guys yesterday, and they're consultancy. And one guy comes from the kind of digital marketing space. One of the partners comes from digital marketing, and the other comes from brand traditional agencies. And for them, I said, look, what makes you guys unique is the marriage of digital marketing chops and brand credibility. That's a very unique marriage. Usually you get people who are great at making pretty pictures in advertising, but can't really look at a Google Analytics spreadsheet and really decipher what's going on. Likewise, you get people who are really good at pay-per-click marketing, but couldn't make something compelling to save their lives. And what these two guys had was the convergence of those two things. And that, I believe, was something quite compelling. And so, again, I can't answer the question for every consultant listening to this, but what I would do is really canvas your customers and probe deeply to try to find out, what is it of the 100 things we do for you? What are the 2 or 3 that really you can't find anywhere else? And that's, I think, the raw material for creating some form of subscription offering that people would be compelled to buy.
Did you have those conversations and do that work yourself, or is this kind of looking back in hindsight as a best practice?
No, we did not do it. We did not hire somebody, but we spent a lot of time talking to customers. We had salespeople at the time. So we had 3 or 4 salespeople as part of our company. And so we spent a lot of time talking to our salespeople saying, what is it that makes people buy? What are the messages you need to use to get people to buy? And so we had a pretty good intuition. We had a pretty good sense of it from running the company for a decade. By that time, we kind of knew why customers came to us. The telltale sign is if you ever get asked to compete in a request for proposal, that's a service that is not unique to you, right? If they're trying to commoditize you and say, hey, respond to this RFP, whatever they're asking for is not something that they truly view as valuable coming to you. So that can be a negative option way of looking at what makes you unique. Is what do you get asked to participate in RFPs for? That service is not something that is truly differentiated amongst your customers.
Right. I think this really comes back to less is more. The more that you can hone in, subtract all the things that aren't necessary and focus on just really what your ideal client wants the most, that's really where the most compelling offer comes from.
Absolutely right. So, it may sound like trite advice, but I think if you're going to make this fundamental shift, because otherwise, as a consultant, look, you can rely on personal rapport with your clients. Customers like you. You're probably the founder of the company, so they want to do business with you. They want to be, and you can create a very nice lifestyle business as a consultant by just being a nice guy or gal, right? Reasonably intelligent, reasonably reliable, good, solid, blocking, tackling person. You can create a very nice lifestyle for yourself, but you're not going to create a sellable asset. And that's a fundamental decision I think consultants need to make. Do I want to have a lifestyle business where at the end of the day, when I'm ready to retire, I close the doors and move on? There's no value created. Or do I want to create something of lasting value that is bigger than me personally, that has an exit potential? If it's the latter, you can't rely on the human elements of why people use you, right? Because if you ask your customers, well, why do you use us as a consultancy and not the 3 other guys who use us? If the words are things like, well, I like you, or I trust you, or I think we have good personal rapport, those are good sticky attributes, but that's not something that you could build a business around. To build a business around, it has to be something hard that they would buy from you, even if they didn't like you.
I think these are really great points. And I was going to ask you around, you mentioned the pricing, right? Going from much higher profitability, you might be selling, let's just say $40,000 or $100,000 consulting engagements to all of a sudden now landing maybe a $40,000 subscription, but it's spaced out over 12 months. So instead of collecting $40,000 all at once or split it over 2, you're splitting that over 12. And so now you're making $3,333 roughly or so per month. So is that really the way that you would recommend that people think about it when they're saying, yeah, I'm going to give up a lot of money. I'm not going to make as much as I could because I'm not landing these larger projects and things are now getting spaced out over the monthly period, kind of ongoing. Is that the way that they should think about it? Is that it's about really creating more value? And so they need to be prepared to think with a long-term mindset? Or is there some other way that people should be thinking about the difference that they're going to be in terms of their earnings from landing much higher paying projects as a kind of custom consulting engagement to one where you're doing something on an ongoing kind of recurring manner? While we work with a lot of seasoned and experienced consultants here at Consulting Success, I'm often contacted by new early stage consultants. Invariably, the question I'm asked is, what are the steps I should take to become a successful consultant and grow my consulting business to my first 6 figures per year? Well, I'm excited to announce that we've opened the doors for our Momentum program. This is our most popular program for early stage consultants, and it has helped almost 1,000 consultants to start, run, and grow successful consulting businesses. It gives you the step-by-step plan to help you with your messaging, your fees, and pricing strategies, how to win more proposals, how to go to market more effectively,
developing a marketing system to generate leads consistently, and so much more. And right now, until September the 19th, you can sign up for Momentum and get 50% off the regular price by going to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO. Only 100 spots are available to join Momentum and get 50% off. This deal is only available until September the 19th or until all 100 spots are gone. We won't be opening up new spots in this program for several months, so don't wait. Go to consultingsuccess.com/audio. That's consultingsuccess.com/audio, AUDIO.
Yeah, I was thinking about it in terms of cash flow as opposed to profitability. Because at scale, a subscription-based or syndicated-based consultancy can be very profitable. It can be even more profitable than a project-based consultancy. But the key is at scale, meaning when you've got hundreds or thousands of subscribers or consulting clients. In the short term, however, when you make the change, the custom project is going to be much easier to drive a short-term profit from. Mm-hmm. So I would think about it more in the context of cash flow. So in the short term, if you're going to move to more of a syndicated or productized service, you can expect that profitability will be reduced, in particular as you scale up the offering. In those first few months and years, it will likely reduce your profitability. Now, from a cash flow perspective, it depends on when you charge for your subscription. The benchmark companies that we were looking at, these would be Bloomberg, IDC, at the time Jupiter, Yankee Group, Forrester, etc. They all charged for their subscriptions up front. So from a cash flow perspective, if you're charging for your subscription up front, your cash flow can be fine. In our case, we would charge a $40,000 subscription up front, but then we would express that in terms on our accounting books as in installments. So I think it's important to make sure you're thinking about cash when you think about this shift and how you're going to distinguish that from, say, profitability and the difference between profitability today versus sort of at scale.
Very good points. I think, John, you're best known for your terrific book, Built to Sell. Why did you write that book?
So by the time, this goes back to 2010 or 11 now, so 4 or 5 years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, gosh, time is slipping away. Mm-hmm. I felt like I'd learned a few things about building sellable company. In many cases, it's the hard way. I owned a little graphic design and marketing agency, similar to the protagonist in the book, Alex Stapleton. And I can remember at the time, at one point, we had about $1.5 million in revenue and about $150,000 in profit. And I went to a couple of advisors that I had because I wanted to raise some investment round, like an investment round, get them to invest, give us some growth capital. And at the time, marketing agencies were trading on the New York Stock Exchange for like 20 times earnings. And so being stupid and naive, I said, oh, well, if we've got $150,000 in profit, then our company must be worth $3 million, 150,000 times 20. Right? So I went into these two guys who were sort of advisors to us and said, well, look, I think our company's worth $3 million. So 10% of it's worth $300,000. So I'd like you to invest $300,000 in return for 10% of the company. And they kind of laughed me out of the office, right? Like, you have no idea what you're doing. And so it was sort of lessons like that I'd learned along the way about what drives value, my own personal experience having been involved in 4 different companies that I wanted to sort of impart. I left the business that had acquired ours. I stayed on for a year, and I had nothing to do, lots of time. And I don't know if that's ever happened to you where you have this sort of some big life experiences that you feel like you want to share for some reason. And that was what sort of precipitated the book.
Interesting.
Yeah.
How did you get it? Because it's done very well. And it really is a terrific book. So if anyone listening to this that has not checked it out, make sure that you go and grab that. And John, I know you have another book, The Automatic Customer. I believe that's the name, right?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, that's also a very good book. So how did you get Built to Sell, starting with that one? Because I think that's the one that, from my perspective, you're probably best known for. How did you get it in front of so many people, right? There's a lot of authors who write books and then nothing really happens with it. They might sell some, but they don't really make the level of impact or get into the hands of as many people as they'd like. So what did you do specifically to make that book such a success?
got a publisher, and more importantly, got an agent. So the first iteration of Built to Sell was self-published. And a lot of consultants would have self-published books, right? Like it's almost a cliche to say that you should create a self-published book. There's a whole lot of very credible authors, Seth Godin and Tim, kind of gone down the route of self-publishing, right? As well as lots of unknown authors who've sold like 100 copies of their book have also self-published. When I first started Built to Sell, I couldn't get a publisher, didn't know how to start getting a publisher, didn't know anything about it. And so I said, okay, well, I'll self-publish it, and got a few copies sold. One of the people who read it and contacted me was a guy named Bo Burlingham, who was at the time an editor-at-large of Inc. magazine.
Right, yeah.
Has written lots of amazing books, Stake of the Outcome, many others. And Bo said, I really like this book. Let me know how I can help you promote it or whatever. And so we got in touch, and he put me in touch with his agents. And the agents he put me in touch with had relationships with the big 5 publishers in New York. She said, look, I think this is the next E-Myth. I'll take it to the 5 big publishing shops. And sure enough, Random House bought the rights. That would never have happened if I hadn't had an agent. It would never have happened if I hadn't had a sort of lucky relationship with Bo, or a lucky interaction with Bo Burlingham. So my advice, you can self-publish for sure and sell copies to the back of the room, and you can get some copies sold through self-publishing. But if you're not Tim Ferriss and you're not Seth Godin, I think the credibility of a top 5 publishing masthead, just catapults the book into a totally different headspace for a lot of people. Again, if you have built-in credibility, if you are a famous author, then by all means self-publish, because you're going to make a whole lot more money on each book you sell. But if you're trying to make the leap from unknown consultant to sort of household name, if you will, I'm not sure if that's the right frame, but more sort of credible person. There's nothing that beats that credibility of saying, yeah, it was published by Random House or Simon & Schuster. And sure, those mastheads have maybe diminished in credibility over time, but I think there's still a huge swath of people who use them as a shortcut to, is this a vanity project book, or is this a real book? And so that's my advice, is try to get a publisher. And the first step in that is get a good agent. And
what if this is, I guess, your situation, someone that's maybe published or self-published a book, and now they're hearing you say, well, yeah, you should take it to a trade publisher. Was there any pushback, any negative consequence of you first self-publishing the same book and then taking it to an agent and then a publisher who would put it out again?
Yes. Yeah, that's a downside. That is definitely a potential risk in doing it that way. Random House asked me to write a whole new section for the book. So if you compare the self-published book with the actual Random House version, it's got another 10,000 words, maybe 80 pages. In the Random House edition, they changed the cover. So they made some fundamental changes to it. I can't remember, but I would assume I gave them sales numbers on the self-published book, and they realized that it was relatively modest distribution on the self-published book. I mean, I think we might have sold 1,002 copies. So it wasn't like we had sold 50% of the potential market for the book already. So they probably got comfortable with it for those reasons. But it was not their ideal scenario. Their ideal scenario would have been us going to them with a manuscript as opposed to a finished book. It was definitely a downside.
Got it. John, I want to explore one to kind of take a turn here for a moment. I think you spent some time in Europe with your family. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So this is very interesting for me because 2017, I spent about 5 months out of the country with my family traveling in Europe and Japan and other places. And so I'm always interested when I meet and speak with other entrepreneurs and business owners who have created the freedom, the lifestyle, the flexibility to be able to live and work in different places. And if I'm not mistaken, you were based in, was it Aix-en-Provence or somewhere in southern France?
That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. We lived there for 3 years.
Yeah. Terrific place. Why did you go there?
Well, I had sold my most recent company in 2009. And so I was not working at the time. Our kids were 5 and 3. And my wife and I realized it was probably a good time in our lives before we kind of sunk our teeth into something else to try something big and bold. Our kids weren't so established with friends and sports and school. They were relatively transferable, if you will. Mm-hmm. And so we thought Europe was kind of a cool choice because it felt exotic enough, but still safe. There's some places that would be certainly more exotic and more transformative from an experience perspective. But with the 3-year-old and 5-year-old, we thought, well, it's an industrialized economy, we get good healthcare and so forth. And then being Canadian, we thought, well, France would be good because they'd get a little bit French if we moved there. And then I Googled the sunniest place in France. And Aix-en-Provence came up as the most beautiful weather. And it does sound like you've been there.
I have, yeah. Yeah.
The weather's it's sunny 300 days a year, something like desert climate. So we moved there, and it was a tremendous. I'd recommend that to anyone with the flexibility to kind of live and work where they can. It was a tremendous experience
for sure.
Our family.
Definitely. Yeah. It's funny that you mentioned that. It's probably, that's 100% one of the searches that I would be doing as well, looking for sunshine and warmth. So that resonates.
Yeah.
I mean, clearly you've done a lot. Your new business here, the Value Builder company and system that you mentioned you have 900 consultants that are now teaching these principles and steps, helping companies to increase their value. You've written multiple books, accomplished a lot. What's your daily routine, or what keeps you sharp and productive and focused and kind of working at these high levels of performance?
Well, that's very kind of you to say.
Any habits that you have in place that you practice on a regular basis or even daily basis that help you to accomplish what you're accomplishing?
Yeah, I'm a big gratitude guy. So I keep a gratitude journal every morning. First thing I do in the morning is write 3 things I'm grateful for and 3 things that would make today a great day. And so I know it sounds corny and cheesy, but it's just my own little kind of way of saying thank you to the stars and so forth. So I do that every morning. I think that centers me. We're a big believer in daily huddles at our company. So I have a daily huddle with our management team here, which I think is a great sort of practice for us because it allows us to know that no matter what happens, we have that opportunity to connect with each other and talk about what's going on, where are we sort of stuck, and what are some of the accomplishments you had with it this day. And in a funny way, it sort of frees us up for the rest of the day. We don't have to have constant meetings all day because we know that we're going to all kind of check in at the same time in the same place. So that's a good practice for us here at Value Builder. It's something that we sort of cascading set of meetings. So it starts, myself and our leadership team here does a daily meeting, and then they in turn have a daily meeting with their direct reports and so forth. So it makes sure everybody in the company is in a daily meeting, which is, I think, a good practice for us.
For the consultant listening to this, who is still very much the center of their business, but is saying to themselves after listening to this, or maybe has been considering for some time, that they want to create more value within their business, they want to set it up for a potential sale down the road. What are, maybe a couple of things that are top priority or should be top priority for them that they should be implementing or starting to work on?
The first thing I would do is find your TVR. So TVR stands for teachable, valuable, repeatable. And basically what you want to do is grab a whiteboard or a piece of blank paper and write down over the last 2 or 3 years all of the services that you've offered, all the consulting projects that you've been involved in, and then rate them on a score of 0 to 10 on these 3 attributes. How teachable that service is to employees. If you were to hire employees, could they deliver it? Or do you have some sort of unique expertise that enables you to do that? 0 to 10 on valuable means valuable in the eyes of your customer. So the opposite of valuable is commodity, right? So if it's a commodity, a service that they get from 50 other consultants, give it a 0. If you've really got something unique, then give it a 10 as it relates to a service. And then repeatable relates to the buying cadence of the customer. Like if you're offering, strategic planning services to large enterprise organizations, well, large enterprise organizations don't write strategic plans every day, right? So you give that a very low score. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you're offering SEO or SEM, search engine marketing services, and they need an SEM report every month on the efficacy and efficiency of their keywords, well, that would be highly repeatable, right? Because customers need it every month. And so give it a score of 0 to 10 on repeatable. So once you've got your TVR for all of the services that you've offered in the last year or two, what you're looking for is to eliminate any that score low on that TVR. They're deeply dependent on you personally or things that customers only ever buy once. And eliminate those services from your offering. They may feel good, they may keep you busy, but they're taking away from your ultimate ability to build a more scalable practice. And then try to zero in on it. Ask yourself, is there a service or a product that you could scale beyond you personally. And that's really where the raw material making this transition is. So I think the very first step is TBR. TBR all your services, score them on a scale of 10, and figure out which ones have the potential to scale up.
Fantastic. John, I want to thank you so much for coming on here. Where is the best place for people to go to learn more about you, your company, and your work?
Yeah, I think the best place is to go to valuebuilder.com/apply. That's the page we have for consultants. So if you're kind of curious about what we do, valuebuilder.com/apply.
Fantastic. John, thank you so much. We'll have all the resources, the show notes, transcript, the links here for you. Just head over to consultingsuccess.com, type in John Warrillow, and you'll find it there. Again, John, really appreciate you coming on, and thanks so much.
My pleasure, Mike. Great to be here.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Consulting Success Podcast. For more episodes and to subscribe, rate, and leave a review, head on over to iTunes. And if you'd like to develop consistent lead flow and a highly profitable consulting business, learn more about our coaching programs at consultingsuccess.com.